Mafia boss went to his wedding, but was left alone when his past changed everything. The cathedral doors opened, and every guest stood for the bride. But no bride came. Only an old woman in black entered the aisle, holding a bloodstained envelope in both hands. Lorenzo De Santis, the most feared mafia boss in the city, stood at the altar in a tailored wedding suit, surrounded by politicians, crime lords, and armed guards pretending to be guests. His future wife was missing. His alliance was collapsing in front of everyone. Then the old woman placed the envelope in his hand and whispered, "Your bride knows what you did 5 years ago." Lorenzo opened it. Inside was a photograph of a woman he had buried in his past. The only woman he had ever loved. The woman he thought was dead. And written across the back were 4 words that turned his wedding into a war. "She is still alive." 5 years earlier, Lorenzo De Santis had made the only mistake a mafia boss was never allowed to make. He loved someone more than power. Her name was Isabella Romano. She was not born into his world. She did not come from a crime family, did not understand blood oaths, did not speak in threats hidden behind smiles. She was a violinist who played in hotel lounges, charity dinners, and private events where rich men pretended culture made them decent. Lorenzo first saw her at a fundraiser hosted by a senator he owned. The room had been filled with criminals in expensive suits, judges with dirty hands, and businessmen who smiled too much. Lorenzo had attended because his presence was required, not because he cared about the cause. He stood near the balcony, silent and bored, while men approached him like pilgrims visiting a dangerous shrine. Then Isabella began to play. The entire room softened. Even Lorenzo. That was what made him hate her at first. She created silence without fear. She commanded attention without violence. She made people listen without owning them. To a man like Lorenzo, that kind of power felt impossible. So he watched her. Then he protected her. Then he ruined both their lives by falling in love with her. Isabella was not impressed by his money, his guards, or the way men stepped aside when he walked through a room. She questioned him with a calmness no one else dared. She asked why restaurants emptied private rooms for him, why police cars slowed near his house but never stopped, why every man around him looked ready to kill or die at the smallest gesture. Lorenzo lied at first. Then he told half-truths. Then, one night, when Isabella saw blood on his cuff and fear in the eyes of a man begging outside his office, she demanded the truth. And Lorenzo, against every rule he had ever lived by, gave it to her. He expected her to run. She did not, but she also did not accept him. "You are not powerful because people fear you," she told him. "You are powerful because you are convinced your self-fear is all you deserve." Those words stayed with him longer than any bullet wound. For a year, Isabella became the secret that softened the most dangerous man in the city. Lorenzo changed in ways his enemies did not understand, and his own men quietly feared. He delayed executions. He cut ties with traffickers. He refused deals that involved women and children. He began moving parts of his empire toward legitimate business. The old families called it weakness. Lorenzo called it survival, because for the first time, he wanted a future that did not smell like gunpowder. But the mafia world does not forgive transformation. It punishes it. The first warning came when Isabella's apartment was searched. Nothing was stolen except a framed photograph of her and Lorenzo at a seaside villa. The second warning came when her violin case was left outside Lorenzo's estate, empty and cracked. The third warning came from inside his own family. His uncle, Salvatore De Santis, told him love had made him visible. Lorenzo ignored him. That was his second mistake. The night everything ended, Isabella was supposed to meet him at the old opera house after her final performance. Lorenzo had planned to leave the city with her for 2 weeks. No guards nearby. No business calls. No empire breathing down their necks. But she never arrived. Instead, Lorenzo received a video. Isabella tied to a chair, her face bruised, her voice trembling as she begged him not to come. Behind her stood men wearing masks. One of them held her violin. Then the screen went black. By dawn, a burned car was found near the coast. Inside were Isabella's bracelet, her torn dress, and enough blood for the police to declare there could be no survivor. Lorenzo did not cry when they told him. He went quiet, the kind of quiet that made his closest men step back. For 48 hours, the city held its breath. Then Lorenzo De Santis became the monster everyone had always feared he could be. 3 rival warehouses burned in one night. 2 corrupt captains disappeared. A judge who had leaked information was found alive but ruined, confessing every name he had sold. The men suspected of taking Isabella were hunted across borders, dragged back, and erased from the criminal map. But none of it brought her back. After that, Lorenzo stopped pretending he could be saved. He rebuilt his empire with colder hands. He made alliances not from trust, but from leverage. He no longer rejected the old families. He mastered them. He turned grief into reputation until his name became something mothers whispered to reckless sons and enemies used only in private. Still, every year on the anniversary of Isabella's death, he vanished. No gods, no meetings, no orders, only Lorenzo, a locked room, and the last recording of Isabella's music. Then came Bianca Valenti. She was the daughter of the most influential Mafia family in the North, elegant, educated, and trained since childhood to understand the cost of power. A marriage between Lorenzo and Bianca would unite ports, banks, judges, and old bloodlines that had been enemies for generations. It was not love. That was why Lorenzo accepted it. Love had destroyed him once. A calculated marriage could not. Bianca understood the arrangement perfectly. She wanted security, status, and the kind of crown only Lorenzo could place on her head. She never asked about Isabella. She never asked why Lorenzo kept one room in his estate locked. She never asked why no music was allowed in his house. That made her convenient. The wedding was designed to be more than a ceremony. It was a declaration. Every powerful family in the country had been invited. Politicians arrived through side entrances. Business magnates smiled beside killers. Armed guards stood disguised as ushers. Even Lorenzo's enemies attended, because refusing the invitation would be treated as an insult. The cathedral itself had been secured for 3 days. Every window checked. Every entrance watched. Every priest, florist, musician, and server investigated. Lorenzo had planned for assassination attempts. He had not planned for absence. When the hour came, he stood at the altar in a black wedding suit, expression unreadable, while hundreds of guests waited for Bianca Valenti to walk down the aisle and become his wife. But the doors opened to an old woman dressed in mourning black. No one recognized her at first. Then Lorenzo did. Maria, Isabella's former music teacher. The woman who had taught Isabella to play as a child. The woman who had disappeared from the city after Isabella's death. Maria walked slowly down the aisle, ignoring the guns shifting beneath jackets, ignoring the rising whispers, ignoring the way Lorenzo's guards moved toward her. In her hands, she carried a bloodstained envelope sealed with red wax. Lorenzo's body went still, because he knew the wax seal. It was Isabella's. Maria stopped before him. Her eyes were wet, but her voice was steady. Your bride is not coming. The cathedral erupted in whispers. Bianca's father stood from the front row, his face turning red with humiliation. What is this? Maria did not look at him. She looked only at Lorenzo. Your bride knows what you did 5 years ago. Lorenzo's hand closed around the envelope. For the first time in years, a tremor moved through his fingers. Inside was a photograph. Isabella, older, thinner, alive, standing near a window in a place Lorenzo did not recognize, one hand pressed against the glass as if she were trapped behind it. On the back were 4 words. She is still alive. The cathedral vanished around him. The guests, the alliance, the wedding, Bianca's empty place at the altar. All of it became meaningless beneath the impossible truth in his hand. Lorenzo looked up at Maria. Where is she? Maria's lips trembled. I was told to give you this after Bianca disappeared. Where is Isabella? I don't know. Lorenzo stepped closer, and every guard in the room reached for a weapon. Maria did not move. But I know who kept her from you. Before she could speak the name, the cathedral lights flickered. Once, twice. Then the large screen near the altar, prepared to show wedding photographs, turned black. A video appeared. Bianca Valenti sat in a chair, still wearing her bridal robe, her face pale but unharmed. Behind her stood masked men. Her father shouted her name. Lorenzo did not move. Then a distorted voice filled the cathedral. Congratulations, Lorenzo. Today you finally marry the truth. The camera shifted. Another woman appeared beside Bianca. Bound, weak, but alive. Isabella. A sound moved through the cathedral like a collective breath breaking. Lorenzo's face did not change, but everyone near him felt the temperature of the room drop. The voice continued. 5 years ago, you chose revenge over finding her. Today, you will choose again. The screen split into 2 images. Bianca, the Alliance bride. Isabella, the buried past. The voice laughed softly. One woman gives you an empire. The other destroys it. Choose before midnight. The screen went black. Then gunfire erupted outside the cathedral doors. The wedding guests screamed. Armed men rushed through the side aisles. Lorenzo's guards formed a wall around him, but Lorenzo did not look at the exits, the enemies, or the panicked families. He looked only at the blank screen where Isabella's face had vanished. For 5 years, he had believed grief was his punishment. Now he understood grief had been a distraction. Someone had stolen the woman he loved, buried her alive in his past, and waited until his wedding day to reveal the truth. Lorenzo slowly removed his wedding ring from the velvet cushion beside him. The ring meant alliance, control, a future built without love. He dropped it onto the altar. The sound was small, but every Mafia boss in that cathedral heard the meaning. The wedding was over. The war had begun. The cathedral became a battlefield dressed as a wedding. Guests screamed beneath golden chandeliers. Politicians crawled under pews beside men they had secretly protected for years. Crime lords reached for hidden weapons while their wives clutched pearls and prayers. Outside, gunfire cracked against the stone walls, and every stained glass saint seemed to tremble beneath the sound. Lorenzo De Santis stood at the altar without moving. His men waited for orders. His enemies waited for weakness. Bianca Valenti's father waited for an apology that would never come. But Lorenzo was no longer inside the wedding. He was inside the photograph. Isabella alive. Isabella bound. Isabella looking into the camera with eyes that carried 5 years of captivity. 5 years. The number moved through him like a blade. For 5 years, he had avenged a death that never happened. For 5 years, he had buried tenderness under violence, silenced music in his home, and turned himself into a man Isabella would barely recognize. And somewhere in that same world, she had been breathing, waiting, suffering. His captain, Enzo, stepped close. Boss, we need to move you out. Lorenzo's voice was quiet. Seal the cathedral. Enzo stared at him. Boss! Nobody leaves. The order rolled through the guards instantly. The cathedral doors slammed shut. Men took positions at every exit. The guests who had thought themselves powerful began to understand they were not witnesses anymore. They were suspects. Bianca's father, Carlo Valenti, stormed toward the altar, red-faced and humiliated. You dare lock my family inside like criminals? My daughter is missing. Lorenzo turned his eyes on him. Carlo stopped. It was not fear that silenced him. It was a realization that Lorenzo's rage had moved beyond politics. Your daughter was shown alive, Lorenzo said. The woman beside her was stolen from me for 5 years. If you want Bianca back, sit down and let me find a man who knew enough to destroy this wedding. Carlo's mouth tightened. Are you accusing my blood? I am accusing everyone. The word spread through the cathedral like smoke. Lorenzo walked down from the altar, the blood-stained envelope still in his hand. His wedding suit were perfect, but his eyes had become something ancient and merciless. Every guest he passed lowered their gaze, not out of respect, but survival. Maria, Isabella's old teacher, remained near the first pew, pale but steady. Lorenzo stopped in front of her. Tell me everything. Maria's hands shook. 3 nights ago, someone came to my apartment. They left the envelope, the photograph, and instructions. They said if I wanted Isabella to live, I had to bring it here after the bride failed to appear. Who? I never saw his face. Lorenzo leaned closer. Maria. Her eyes filled. I heard his voice once before. Lorenzo went still. When? The night Isabella disappeared. Every sound in the cathedral seemed to fade. Maria swallowed. I was at the opera house that night. Isabella asked me to wait backstage because she was nervous. She said she was going to meet you afterward. She said she was leaving the city with you. Lorenzo's jaw tightened. I heard arguing near the service entrance. Isabella was speaking to a man. She sounded afraid, but not surprised, like she knew him. Lorenzo's voice lowered. What did he say? Maria closed her eyes, forcing herself back into the memory. He said, if Lorenzo chooses you, he destroys a family. Then Isabella said, he deserves a life beyond the family. Lorenzo's hand slowly closed around the envelope. Maria looked at him with grief. Then someone struck her. I hid because I was a coward. By the time I came out, she was gone. Why did you never tell me? Because the next morning, I received a photograph of my grandson walking to school. On the back it said, one word to Lorenzo, and the boy dies. Lorenzo did not blink. Maria whispered, I am sorry. Sorry, a small word for 5 years of hell. Lorenzo turned away before his rage could consume the wrong person. Enzo approached with a phone. We traced the video feed. It bounced through 3 servers, but the first signal came from the old port district. Carlo Valenti stepped forward sharply. That is my territory. Lorenzo looked at him. Carlo's face hardened. You think I would kidnap my own daughter? I think a man who wants power may sacrifice anything if he believes he can control the outcome. Carlo's guard shifted. Lorenzo's guards raised their weapons. The cathedral became a breath away from massacre. Then Maria spoke. There was something else. Lorenzo looked back. Maria reached into her coat and pulled out a small silver object, a violin string holder. Broken. Old. Lorenzo recognized it instantly. It belonged to Isabella's violin. I found this inside the envelope, Maria said. There are numbers scratched into the back. Lorenzo took it carefully, as if touching a relic. The numbers were faint, carved with desperate pressure. 17-4-9. Enzo frowned. Could be a date. Lorenzo shook his head. His heart had already recognized the code before his mind accepted it. Isabella had once taught him how musicians mark rehearsal rooms in old theaters. Floor, corridor, room, 17, 4, 9. Lorenzo looked up. The conservatory. Enzo's eyes sharpened. The abandoned music conservatory near the old port. Lorenzo nodded. Isabella performed there when she was young. She used to say the building remembered every note ever played inside it. Carlo Valenti moved toward him. My daughter was shown in that video too. My men are coming. No. Carlo's face twisted. No. If your territory is involved, your men may be compromised. You cannot cut me out of my own daughter's rescue. Lorenzo stepped close enough that Carlo's guards nearly fired. If Bianca is innocent, I will bring her back. If she is not, I will bring back the truth. Carlo stared at him. For the first time, fear touched the older man's eyes, because in Lorenzo's world, truth was often more fatal than death. Within minutes, Lorenzo left the cathedral through a service corridor while the city erupted around the failed wedding. News of the missing bride spread faster than police could suppress it. Every family received the message clearly. The De Santis-Valenti alliance had been publicly humiliated, and Lorenzo's dead lover had returned as a key to a larger war. Inside the armored car, Lorenzo sat in silence, staring at the broken violin piece in his palm. Enzo watched him carefully. He had seen Lorenzo angry. He had seen Lorenzo after betrayals. He had seen him order executions with the calm of a man signing contracts. But this was different. This was grief waking up with teeth. Boss, Enzo said quietly, we need to consider that the woman in the video may not be Isabella. Lorenzo did not look at him. Enzo continued carefully. 5 years is a long time. Faces can be altered. Videos can be staged. If someone wanted to make you reckless, it was her. You saw her for seconds. Lorenzo's eyes lifted. Enzo stopped speaking. It was her, Lorenzo repeated. Not because of her face. Because of her eyes. Even through a screen. Even through pain. Isabella had looked at the camera not like a victim begging to be saved, but like a woman sending a message to the only man who might understand her silence. The conservatory stood at the edge of the old port, swallowed by fog and rusted fences. Once, it had been beautiful. Now its windows were broken, its stone angels blackened by rain, its entrance chained shut. The city had forgotten it. Isabella had not. Lorenzo's men moved through the building with tactical precision. Flashlights cut across dust-covered floors. Old posters peeled from the walls. A cracked piano sat in the lobby, its keys yellowed and silent. Lorenzo walked past it without slowing. 17, 4, 9. They found the staircase behind the main recital hall. 17 steps down. 4th corridor. 9th room. The door was locked. Lorenzo shot the lock himself. Inside was not Isabella. It was a room full of her. Photographs covered the walls. Isabella at different ages. Isabella in captivity. Isabella reading. Isabella sleeping on a narrow bed. Isabella playing a violin with no audience. Some photographs were months old. Some were years old. Lorenzo stepped inside as if entering a tomb that still breathed. On a metal table lay a stack of letters, all addressed to him, all unopened. His hand hovered over them before he picked one up. The handwriting was Isabella's. Lorenzo, if this ever reaches you, it means someone finally made a mistake. I am alive. I do not know what they told you, but I did not leave you. I did not betray you. I did not die in that car. They took me because I asked you to leave the life they needed you to continue. They said love was making you weak. Maybe it was, but it was also making you human. Do not trust a family that tells you grief is loyalty. Lorenzo stopped reading. His vision blurred, but no tear fell. Not there, not in front of men, not while Isabella was still somewhere waiting. Enzo found a recorder on the desk and pressed play. Isabella's voice filled the room. Weak, older, alive. If you are hearing this, Lorenzo, then the wedding happened. Oh, almost happened. I am sorry. I tried to stop them from using Bianca, but she made her own choices. She is not innocent, but she is not the one who began this. Lorenzo's eyes darkened. The recording continued. They move me often, always through places connected to your family, never your enemies. That is how I knew the truth. The person who took me was not trying to destroy you from outside. He was preserving you from inside. A long silence. Then Isabella's voice broke. Salvatore. Enzo cursed under his breath. Lorenzo did not move. Uncle Salvatore, the man who had warned him love made him visible. The man who had stood beside him after Isabella's supposed death. The man who had encouraged every act of revenge that followed. The man who had helped turn Lorenzo into a weapon again. Isabella's voice continued. He told me your father built the De Santis empire with blood, and you had no right to cleanse it for a woman with a violin. He said if you would not bury love willingly, he would bury it for you. The recorder clicked. Then another voice entered. Male, older, Salvatore, you were always clever, Isabella. That is why you became dangerous. Lorenzo would have followed you out of hell if you asked sweetly enough. A faint sound of struggle. Then Isabella's voice, furious despite its weakness. He was already in hell. I was trying to lead him out. Salvatore laughed softly. No, child, you were trying to steal my king. The recording ended. The room went dead silent. Enzo looked at Lorenzo. Boss! Lorenzo placed the recorder down with terrifying care. Find him. He disappeared from the cathedral during the attack. Then find the men who disappeared with him. Before Enzo could answer, a phone rang inside the room. An old landline on the wall. Everyone froze. Lorenzo picked it up. For a moment, there was only static. Then Salvatore's voice emerged, warm and familiar, like an uncle calling from another room. My boy. Lorenzo closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, there was no nephew left in his face. Only the judge. Where is she? Salvatore sighed, still asking the wrong question. You should ask why she survived. Lorenzo said nothing. Salvatore continued. I kept her alive because dead women become memories. Living women become leverage. I thought one day you might need correction again. And Bianca? An ambitious girl who wanted to be queen before learning queens are also disposable. Lorenzo's grip tightened around the phone. You took her to stop the wedding. No. Bianca helped arrange the wedding trap. She believed Isabella's existence would force you to kill the past publicly and choose her. Poor girl did not realize I never intended her to leave the board either. Lorenzo looked toward Enzo. Enzo had already begun tracing the call. Salvatore laughed. Do not bother. You will not trace me in time. Then why call? Because midnight is coming. You have two women, Lorenzo, one who represents your alliance, one who represents your weakness. You may save one. Lorenzo's voice was ice. I will find both. No, Salvatore said. You will choose. And when you do, every family will see whether love still controls you. The line clicked dead. Seconds later, Enzo's device flashed. Signal came from the South Docks. Lorenzo turned sharply. Another guard entered the room, breathless. Boss, we found something downstairs. They followed him into the basement rehearsal chamber. There, projected against a torn curtain, was a live video feed. Two locations. Bianca tied to a chair inside a warehouse surrounded by fuel barrels. Isabella chained inside a glass soundproof room somewhere dark, water slowly rising around her ankles. Below both images was a countdown. 47 minutes. Myra's word from another story? Not relevant. Need no accidentally. Continue, Enzo whispered. South Docks has dozens of warehouses. We cannot hit both without more location data. Lorenzo stayed at the screen. Bianca was crying now, panic stripping away her elegance. Isabella was not crying. She was looking around the glass room, studying the corners, the ceiling, the water flow. Still fighting. Still thinking. Still Isabella. Then she looked directly at the camera and lifted her bound hand slightly. 3 fingers. Then 1. Then 2. Lorenzo's breath stopped. It was not random. It was music. Measure 3. Beat 1. Beat 2. He looked around the rehearsal chamber. On the cracked piano, one sheet of music had been left open. Isabella's favorite piece. Lorenzo crossed to it and found 3 notes circled in red. C. A. Ah. Enzo frowned. Ka. Lorenzo's eyes sharpened. No. Cargo. He turned back to the screen. Cargo hold. She is on a ship. Enzo moved immediately. There are 6 cargo vessels docked out tonight. Lorenzo looked again at Bianca's feed. The fuel barrels behind her carried a marking. Valenti Shipping. Carlo Valenti's company. The betrayal was widening. Split the teams, Enzo said. We go for Isabella. Send a second unit for Bianca. Lorenzo did not answer, because Salvatore had built the trap carefully. If Lorenzo saved Isabella himself, every family would say he abandoned the Alliance bride for his past. Carlo Valenti would declare war. If he saved Bianca, Isabella might die believing he had chosen power again. And if he divided his forces incorrectly, both women could die. The screen flickered. Salvatore's voice came through the speakers. Choose, nephew. Lorenzo stepped closer to the screen. For 5 years, Salvatore had used his grief like a leash. No more. Lorenzo turned to Enzo. Call Carlo Valenti. Enzo stared at him. Boss. Tell him where his daughter is. Give him the feed. Give him the warehouse coordinates once we confirm them. He may use this against you. He will go for his blood. And if Bianca is part of the betrayal. Lorenzo's eyes remained on Isabella. Then she will live long enough to explain it. Enzo nodded and moved. Lorenzo turned to his remaining men. We take the ship. The rescue began in darkness. Lorenzo's convoy reached the South Docks under heavy fog. Rain started as they crossed the industrial bridge, turning the city lights into blurred halos above the river. Cargo cranes loomed like steel giants. Containers rose in stacked walls of rusted red, blue, and gray. Somewhere inside that maze, Isabella was drowning. Lorenzo moved faster than his woundless men. They found the vessel through the smallest clue, a broken security camera angled toward the water, still transmitting static on the frequency used for the video feed. The ship was registered under a shell company tied to Salvatore's oldest accounts. Of course, the traitor had not hidden outside the family empire. He had hidden inside its paperwork. Lorenzo boarded with 12 men. No speeches. No warnings. Only silent violence. The first guards fell before they could radio. The second group tried to block the lower deck and failed. Lorenzo moved through corridors with a gun in one hand and Isabella's broken violin piece in the other, as if memory itself had become a weapon. At the same time, Carlo Valenti's men stormed the warehouse across the docks. Gunfire echoed from the distance. Bianca's feet shook violently. Then cut to black. Enzo's voice came through Lorenzo's earpiece. Valenti team engaged. Heavy resistance. Bianca's status unknown. Lorenzo kept moving. Every second mattered. They reached the cargo hold. The door was sealed from the outside with electronic locks and a manual steel bar. Water leaked beneath it. Lorenzo's control fractured. Open it. His men worked the lock. Too slow. Lorenzo fired into the panel, sparks exploding. Enzo jammed a crowbar beneath the bar. 2 men pulled. The steel groaned. Inside, through the small reinforced window, Lorenzo saw her. Isabella. The water had risen to her waist. Her face was pale. Her hair clung to her skin. Her wrists were chained to a pipe above her head. She saw him. For one breath, neither of them moved. 5 years collapsed into a single look. Not reunion, not relief. A wound recognizing the hand reaching for it too late. Then Isabella shouted something he could not hear through the glass. Lorenzo slammed his shoulder against the door. Again! Again! Blood spread beneath his suit from the impact. The door finally burst open. Water rushed out around his legs. Lorenzo entered before anyone could stop him, cutting through the flood toward her. His hands shook as he unlocked the chains. The moment she was free, Isabella collapsed forward. He caught her. For the first time in 5 years, Lorenzo held the woman he had buried. She was real, cold, breathing, alive. His arms closed around her with a force that was almost desperate, but Isabella stiffened, not from fear of him, from memory of captivity. Lorenzo felt it and immediately loosened his grip. That hurt more than any bullet. He looked at her face, trying to find the woman from the hotel lounge, the opera house, the seaside villa. She was there, but behind scars, behind years, behind survival he had not been present to witness. Isabella, he said, voice breaking on her name. Her eyes filled, but she did not touch his face. You came, she whispered. The words were not accusation. That made them worse. Before Lorenzo could answer, Enzo appeared at the doorway. Boss, we need to leave. Explosives on the lower deck. Isabella gripped Lorenzo's sleeve. Salvatore is not here. I know. No, she said, forcing herself upright. You don't understand. He wanted you to find me. He wanted you away from the cathedral, away from the families. Lorenzo went still. Her eyes sharpened with terror. The wedding was not only a trap for you. It was a trap for every family head in one place. Lorenzo turned to Enzo. Enzo's phone rang at that exact moment. He answered, listened, and his face changed. The cathedral, he said. The guests are still locked inside. A message arrived on Lorenzo's phone. Live video. The cathedral again. The doors chained from the outside now. Armed men in Salvatore's colors moving through the aisles. And at the altar, where Lorenzo had dropped the wedding ring, stood Salvatore De Santis, smiling. His voice came through the video. You chose love, nephew. Thank you for proving to every family that you are unfit to rule them. Behind him, hundreds of trapped guests began to scream. The camera turned toward a stack of explosives hidden beneath the altar flowers. Lorenzo's blood turned cold. Salvatore had never wanted Lorenzo to choose between Bianca and Isabella. He wanted Lorenzo to leave the cathedral so he could execute the entire old order and crown himself from the ashes. Isabella swayed beside him. Lorenzo caught her gently, but his eyes remained on the screen. The countdown appeared. 26 minutes. The ship groaned beneath them as a first explosive charge detonated somewhere below deck. The floor shook. Water surged. Enzo shouted for evacuation. Lorenzo looked at Isabella, then at the burning cathedral feed. The past was alive in his arms. The empire was dying behind him. And for the first time, Lorenzo understood the real cruelty of Salvatore's design. No matter what he saved, something would be lost. Isabella gripped his hand with surprising strength. Lorenzo, she said, breathless but steady, do not become the man he needs you to be. He looked at her. The ship alarm screamed. The water rose around their feet. The cathedral countdown kept falling. And somewhere across the city, the wedding that had been abandoned was about to become a funeral for every family that had ever feared the De Santis name. The ship shook as a second charge detonated below deck. Metal screamed beneath Lorenzo's feet. The cargo hold lights flickered, turning Isabella's pale face into flashes of life and shadow. Water rushed across the floor, carrying broken glass, splinters of wood, and 5 years of stolen time toward the open door. Enzo grabbed the frame to steady himself. "Boss, we have to move now." Lorenzo looked at the phone in his hand. The cathedral feed showed hundreds of guests trapped inside, guarded by Salvatore's men. Crime lords who had once ruled cities were now prisoners beneath stained glass. Politicians who had sold justice or protection were crouched beside pews, whispering prayers into hands that had signed death warrants. Carlo Valenti was not there. He had left to save Bianca. That meant the cathedral contained nearly every other head of the old families. Salvatore had planned it perfectly. If the cathedral exploded, the old order would die in one holy fire. Salvatore would blame Lorenzo's obsession with Isabella, declare him unfit, and seize the broken pieces of the underworld before dawn. Lorenzo tightened his hand around the phone. Isabella saw the calculation in his eyes. For 5 years, she had survived by reading the faces of men who controlled locked doors. She knew when a man was choosing between guilt and duty. She knew when love was about to be buried again under the excuse of necessity. So before Lorenzo could speak, she stepped back. "No," she said. The single word cut through the alarms. Lorenzo turned to her. Isabella's legs trembled from cold and captivity, but her eyes were sharp. "Do not look at me like I am the price. You can barely stand. And you can barely think," she said. "That is what he wants." The ship tilted slightly, throwing water against the wall. Enzo's men shouted from the corridor. Smoke began to thicken near the ceiling. Lorenzo moved toward her, instinctively protective. "I am getting you off this ship." "And then what?" Isabella demanded. "You run to the cathedral carrying guilt instead of strategy. You enter Salvatore's final trap because he knows you would rather die than be accused of abandoning anyone again." Lorenzo froze. Isabella's voice softened, but the urgency stayed. "He did not keep me alive because I was useful. He kept me alive because he understood you. He knew the moment you saw me, you would stop being a boss and become a wounded man." Lorenzo's jaw tightened. 5 years ago, he had been exactly that, a wounded man with an army, and Salvatore had shaped that grief into a weapon. "No more." Lorenzo turned to Enzo. "Call Carlo Valenti." Enzo blinked through the smoke. "Boss." "Now." Enzo dialed and handed him the phone as they moved through the flooding corridor. The line connected in the middle of gunfire. Carlo's voice exploded through the speaker. "If my daughter is dead, De Santis, I will burn your name from this country." "Is she alive?" A pause. Then, breathless and furious, Carlo answered, "Yes, wounded, but alive. She is denying everything. She helped Salvatore." "I know," Carlo snapped. "I found his men guarding her. She thought they were protecting her until they started shooting at us." Lorenzo reached the upper deck with Isabella supported between him and Enzo. Rain struck them hard the moment they emerged into the night. "The cathedral is a real target," Lorenzo said. "Salvatore has explosives inside. He wants the family heads dead." Carlo went silent. For all his arrogance, he understood the scale instantly. If the cathedral died, no alliance would matter. No territory would remain stable. The city would become a feeding ground. Lorenzo continued, "You are closest to the cathedral from the east road. I need your men to cut the outer chains and draw fire from the side entrance." Carlo laughed once, bitterly. "Now you need my family." "No," Lorenzo said. "Your daughter needs a city that still exists tomorrow." Another pause. Then Carlo's voice lowered. "And Isabella." Lorenzo looked at the woman beside him, soaked, shivering, alive. "She is with me." Carlo understood the meaning beneath those words. Not chosen over Bianca, not hidden, not denied. "With me." "Then hurry," Carlo said, "because if Salvatore kills those families, none of us survive the war that follows." The line ended. A third explosion tore through the ship. The deck lurched. One of Lorenzo's men fell hard against a container. Flames burst near the engine section. The vessel's horn wailed into the fog like a dying animal. A helicopter thundered overhead. Enzo looked up. "Extraction." Lorenzo pushed Isabella toward the ladder. She caught his wrist. "You are not putting me somewhere safe and leaving without me. You need a doctor." "I needed one for 5 years," she said. "Tonight, I need the truth to end." Lorenzo stared at her. In another life, he might have commanded her. He might have lifted her into the helicopter and ordered it away, calling control protection and fear love. But the woman before him had been chained because men decided her life around her. He would not become one more. So he nodded. "Stay behind me." Isabella gave him a faint, exhausted smile. "I spent 5 years behind locked doors. I'm done standing behind men." Even bleeding inside from guilt, Lorenzo almost smiled. Almost. They reached the helicopter as the ship began to sink behind them. The aircraft lifted into the storm, turning toward the cathedral. Below, the south docks burned in scattered pockets of orange. Across the district, the Valenti warehouse smoked, but Bianca had been pulled alive from the wreckage. Lorenzo watched the city race beneath them. Then his phone buzzed. A new video. Salvatore stood at the cathedral altar, holding Lorenzo's discarded wedding ring between 2 fingers. "My nephew believed this wedding would unite families," he said to the camera. But Lorenzo De Santis was never fit to lead unity. He was ruled first by a dead woman, and now by a living ghost. The camera moved across the trapped guests. Some were bleeding. Some were praying. Some were trying to bargain with gods who had no authority to accept bargains. Salvatore's voice hardened. "You all mock my loyalty to tradition. You allowed Lorenzo to weaken our roots, clean our money, question our methods, and insult the blood that built our thrones. Tonight, I correct that mistake." He lifted the ring. "The old families will die as witnesses to his failure." The countdown on the screen showed 17 minutes. Lorenzo looked at Enzo. How many men inside? Too many for frontal entry. Blueprints. Enzo pulled up the cathedral layout. Main doors chained. Side exits guarded. Underground crypt connect to the old priest's tunnel, but it was sealed decades ago. Isabella leaned forward, studying the plan despite her exhaustion. "There's another passage." Lorenzo turned. She pointed with shaking fingers at the lower chapel section. "Beneath the music gallery. I performed there once for a restoration fundraiser. The choir complained about draft from behind the organ wall. The priest said the old passage had been sealed, but the sound still traveled through it." Enzo looked at the map. "That wall leads under the west transept." "Behind the altar," Lorenzo said. Salvatore had built his stage above a forgotten entrance. For the first time that night, the trap had a crack. The helicopter landed 3 blocks from the cathedral. Police sirens wailed in the distance but never came close. No officer wanted to enter a Mafia war without knowing who would own the city by morning. Carlo Valenti's men were already engaged outside the east entrance, exchanging fire with Salvatore's guards. The distraction pulled half the defenders away from the western side. Lorenzo's team moved through the back streets beneath rain and smoke. Isabella refused to stay behind. Enzo gave her a pistol. Lorenzo looked sharply at him. Enzo only said, "She has earned more trust tonight than half the men we brought." Isabella took the gun with unsteady hands. "I don't want to kill anyone," she said. Lorenzo's voice was low. "Then don't. But if someone tries to take you again, you don't wait for permission to survive." She looked at him. That was the first thing he had said all night that did not sound like ownership. They entered the old chapel through a broken service door. Dust and incense hung in the air. Statues watched them from alcoves, their faces cracked by time. Above them, through stone and distance, they could hear muffled screams from the cathedral. The organ stood against the far wall. Enzo and 2 men pushed it aside, revealing old stonework behind it. The wall looked solid, but Isabella moved forward and pressed a hand against one section. "Hey!" Lorenzo stepped beside her. Their shoulders nearly touched. For one heartbeat, the war paused. He wanted to say everything. That he had failed her. That he had burned the world because he thought she was gone. That he had listened to recordings of her music in the dark like a punishment. That he had not truly lived since the night she disappeared. But apologies spoken while bombs counted down were selfish. So he said only what mattered. "I should have found you." Isabella did not look away from the wall. "Yes," she said. The word struck him cleanly. No comfort. No forgiveness offered out of exhaustion. Just truth. Then she added, "Find me now." Lorenzo raised a hammer Enzo handed him and smashed through the stone. The hidden passage opened into darkness. They entered single file, flashlights cutting through dust and old bones of architecture. The tunnel was narrow, damp, and suffocating. Every step carried them closer to the altar, closer to Salvatore, closer to the man who had made Lorenzo's grief into an empire. Inside the cathedral, Salvatore continued his sermon. The trapped families watched him with hatred and fear. "You think Lorenzo is coming to save you," he said. "He is not. He chose a woman. He always chooses a woman. That is why he lost the right to rule." A guest shouted, "Then why not kill us already?" Salvatore smiled, "Because I want him close enough to hear the prayers." The countdown showed 8 minutes. Beneath the altar, Lorenzo's team reached the end of the tunnel. Above them, wood creaked. Voices echoed. Enzo pointed upward. A trapdoor. Lorenzo lifted his gun. Before he could move, Isabella touched his arm. "Alive?" she whispered. Lorenzo looked at her. "Do not let him turn this into another grave," she said. "Expose him. Expose him, not kill him. For a Mafia boss, exposure could be worse." Lorenzo nodded once. Then they broke through the trapdoor. The cathedral erupted. Lorenzo rose from beneath the altar like a ghost returning for judgment. Enzo's men followed, firing into Salvatore's guard before the traitors could react. Carlo's men breached from the east at the same time, shattering the side doors and flooding the aisle with gunfire. Guests dropped to the floor. Chandeliers shook. The altar flowers exploded under bullets, revealing wide explosives hidden beneath white roses. Salvatore spun around, shock flashing across his face for the first time. Then he saw Isabella, alive, standing behind Lorenzo, holding a gun in both hands. His shock became rage. "You should have drowned quietly," Salvatore hissed. Lorenzo fired once, striking the weapon from Salvatore's hand before the old man could raise it. Salvatore staggered back against the altar. Lorenzo advanced. Every gun in the cathedral shifted, but no one fired. The countdown showed 5 minutes. Enzo and his men moved to the explosives, working frantically to disarm the wiring. Carlo Valenti pulled Bianca through a broken side entrance, her wedding robe stained with blood and smoke. When she saw Isabella, her face crumbled with guilt and fear. Lorenzo saw her, but did not stop. His eyes remained on Salvatore, the uncle who had raised him after his father died, the advisor who had held him after Isabella's supposed death, the traitor who had whispered revenge into his ear while keeping the truth locked in darkness. Salvatore straightened, bleeding from his hand, pride still intact. "Look at you, crawling out of a tunnel with your dead girl like a hero in a cheap opera." Lorenzo's voice was calm. "Tell them." Salvatore laughed. "Tell them what?" "Tell them why Isabella was taken." Around the cathedral, the old families listened. Cameras from dozens of phones had begun recording. Even terrified men understood history when it stood in front of them. Salvatore smiled. "She made you weak." Lorenzo's jaw tightened, but he did not fire. Salvatore turned toward the families, suddenly theatrical. "Yes, I took her. I kept her breathing because Lorenzo needed discipline. He was abandoning route, refusing profitable cargo, insulting old alliances. For what? A violinist with clean hands and foolish dreams." The confession moved through the cathedral like fire. Bianca stared at him, horrified. Carlo lowered his weapon slightly, realizing his daughter had been a pawn in a game older than her ambition. Salvatore pointed at Isabella. That woman would have ended the De Santis empire. Isabella stepped forward. Her voice was weak, but it carried. "No, I would have ended the part of it that needed women chained and children sold to survive." The guests went silent. Some looked away, because the truth did not only accuse Salvatore. It accused them all. Salvatore's face twisted. "You hear her? This is what mercy creates. Judgment from people who should be grateful they were allowed to live." Lorenzo stepped closer. "You killed my future. I preserved your throne. You stole 5 years from her. I gave you 5 years of power." Lorenzo's eyes darkened. "Power built on a lie is not a throne. It is a cage." Salvatore laughed. "And now you will become noble, clean, loved?" You think one woman can wash blood from your name. Lorenzo did not answer immediately. The old Lorenzo might have defended himself. The monster might have killed him. But the man standing there understood something Salvatore never had. This was not about being washed clean. It was about choosing what filth would not be passed on. Lorenzo turned to the trapped families. Listen carefully. Salvatore is not the disease. He is the mirror. Every man in this room who profited from the old roots helped build him. Every judge who looked away. Every banker who cleaned the money. Every father who called daughters' alliances and sons' weapons. A dangerous silence fell. Lorenzo raised his voice. That ends tonight. One of the older bosses shouted from the floor. You think you can threaten all of us while standing beside explosives. Lorenzo looked at him coldly. I am not threatening you. I am giving you the choice I was never given. Walk out of here alive and leave the old roots, or stay loyal to a dead world and be buried with it. The countdown showed 2 minutes. Enzo shouted. Boss, one trigger is remote linked. We need the transmitter. Everyone turned to Salvatore. His smile returned. From inside his jacket, he pulled a small remote. Instantly, 10 guns aimed at him. Salvatore pressed his thumb over the button. Now we see the truth, he whispered. Will you save them, Lorenzo? These men who hated your weakness? These families who would have applauded Isabella's grave if it protected their profit? Lorenzo froze. Salvatore backed toward the altar steps, remote raised. Put down your weapons, or I finish what I began. Carlo shouted, Shoot him. No, Enzo snapped. If his thumb releases, it may trigger. The cathedral held its breath. Then Bianca moved. Still in her torn bridal robe, bleeding from her temple, she stepped into the aisle. Uncle Salvatore, she said softly. Salvatore looked at her with irritation. Go back to your father. Bianca continued walking slowly. You said I would be queen. Carlo stiffened. Bianca, stop. But Bianca did not stop. Her eyes were fixed on the old man who had used her ambition and nearly made her corpse decoration for his revolution. You said Lorenzo would choose Isabella, and the families would finally see him as weak. You said I would survive because I have Valenti blood. Salvatore's face hardened. Do not be stupid, girl. Bianca smiled through tears. I already was. She was close now. Too close. Lorenzo understood a second before Salvatore did. Bianca! She threw herself at Salvatore's arm. The remote flew upward. Salvatore snarled and struck her across the face, but Isabella fired. The bullet hit the remote midday. It shattered before it hit the marble. Enzo ripped the final wire free. The countdown stopped at 19 seconds. For one moment, no one understood they were alive. Then the cathedral exhaled. Salvatore lunged toward Isabella with a hidden blade. Lorenzo caught him halfway. The 2 men crashed against the altar, knocking over candles, scattering white roses across blood-smeared marble. Salvatore fought with the desperation of a man whose life's work had been exposed. He drove the blade toward Lorenzo's throat, but Lorenzo caught his wrist. You still hesitate, Salvatore hissed. Even now, that is a poison. Lorenzo twisted his arm until bone cracked. Salvatore screamed and dropped the blade. Lorenzo slammed him down onto the altar steps and pressed the gun beneath his chin. The entire cathedral watched. This was the moment they expected. The old law, blood for blood. 5 years of captivity demanded death. Every man in the room understood that. Some even wanted it. Because if Lorenzo killed Salvatore now, the story will become simple again. Personal revenge. Family tragedy. Mafia justice. They could survive a story like that. Isabella stepped closer. Her face was pale, exhausted, wet with rain and tears. She did not tell Lorenzo to spare him. She did not tell him what kind of man to be. She only stood where he could see her. Alive. Free. Not a ghost. Not a weakness. A witness. Lorenzo's hand remained steady on the gun. Salvatore smiled through blood. Do it, nephew. Prove you never left my world. Lorenzo looked at him for a long moment. Then he lowered the weapon. Salvatore's smile died. No, the old man whispered. Lorenzo stood. I will not hide your crimes inside a grave. He turned to Enzo. Broadcast everything. The confession, the files, the locations, the names. Enzo nodded. Lorenzo looked across the cathedral at the family heads, the politicians, the bankers, the judges, all of it. Panic moved through the old order. That was when they understood. Lorenzo had not spared Salvatore out of mercy. He had chosen a punishment that would burn every hidden room of their world. Truth. Salvatore struggled as God sees him, but his power was gone. Not because he had lost a fight, but because every man he had controlled now saw the rot beneath his loyalty. Lorenzo turned toward Isabella. For 5 years, he had imagined this moment 1,000 different ways. In those fantasies, he held her and the pain ended. She forgave him. Music returned. The dead years vanished. Reality was crueler. Isabella stood only a few steps away, but there were 5 years between them. 5 years of chains. 5 years of his rage serving the man who had stolen her. 5 years in which Lorenzo had become harder, darker, and more feared while she survived alone. He approached slowly, stopping before he was close enough to touch her. "I chose wrong," he said. Isabella's eyes filled. "You didn't know." "I should have." "Yes," she whispered. "You should have." The honesty broke him more than forgiveness would have. Around them, the cathedral was chaos. Guests were being released. Bianca was crying in her father's arms. Enzo's men dragged Salvatore away. Sirens finally wailed close enough to matter. But Lorenzo heard only Isabella's breathing. "I cannot give you back those years," he said. "No, I cannot ask you to come home." Her lips trembled. "I don't know where home is anymore." The words cut through him, because once he had believed he was a home. Now he was part of the world that had taken it. Lorenzo stepped back. The movement surprised her. He reached into his jacket and removed the broken violin piece from the conservatory. Then he placed it gently on the altar between them. "I will find every place that kept you, every person who touched this, every account that paid for your prison. Not for revenge, for proof, for justice you control." Isabella stared at him. "You control," he repeated. "Not me." For the first time that night, something in her expression shifted. Not forgiveness, not love restored, but recognition of a different man trying to stand where the old one would have commanded. Then a gunshot cracked from the upper gallery. Everyone ducked. Lorenzo moved instantly, covering Isabella with his body. But the bullet was not meant for her. It struck Salvatore in the chest as he was being dragged toward the side aisle. The old man staggered, eyes wide with shock. Lorenzo spun toward the gallery. A masked sniper vanished into the shadows. Salvatore collapsed onto the cathedral floor, blood spreading beneath him. Enzo rushed to him, pressing a hand to the wound. Salvatore grabbed Lorenzo's sleeve with bloody fingers as Lorenzo knelt beside him. For the first time, the old man looked afraid, not of death, of being silenced before he could control the ending. Lorenzo leaned close. "Who ordered the shot?" Salvatore's lips moved. No sound came. Lorenzo gripped him harder. "Who?" Salvatore's eyes shifted past Lorenzo, toward Bianca, then toward Carlo Valenti. A thin smile touched his blooded mouth. "The bride," he whispered. Then he died. Lorenzo slowly turned. Bianca stood frozen in her father's arms, face pale with horror. Carlo's eyes were unreadable. Outside, the cathedral bells began to ring midnight. The bombs were stopped. Isabella was alive. Salvatore was dead. But the final betrayal had not ended at the altar. It had only changed faces. Lorenzo looked across the ruined wedding, past the shattered flowers, past the guests trembling with relief, past the woman he loved and the bride who had never walked down the aisle. His past had returned from a grave. His future had collapsed before it began. And somewhere inside the Valenti family, someone had just murdered the only man who could expose the rest of the truth. The wedding was over, but the real war for Isabella's stolen years had just begun. The cathedral bells rang midnight over a wedding that had become a crime scene. No bride had walked down the aisle. No vows had been spoken. No alliance had been sealed beneath candlelight and stained glass. Instead, the altar was covered with shattered white roses, cut wires, blood, and the broken remains of a bomb that had almost buried every old family in the city. Guests were being dragged outside by guards. Politicians covered their faces from cameras that were not supposed to exist. Crime lords who had entered the cathedral as kings now left like frightened men who had seen their own graves open. Lorenzo De Santis stood in the middle of it all, staring at Bianca Valenti. Salvatore's final words still hung in the air. The bride. Bianca was shaking in her father's arms, her bridal robe torn, her face pale with shock. Carlo Valenti held her too tightly, but his eyes were not on his daughter. They were on Lorenzo. The two men understood the danger immediately. If Bianca had ordered the sniper's shot, then the Valenti family had not been victims. They had been architects. But if Salvatore had lied in his final breath, then accusing Bianca would ignite a war before dawn. Lorenzo looked at Isabella. She stood near the altar, wrapped in Enzo's coat, exhausted beyond words. She had survived drowning, captivity, betrayal, and a cathedral full of men who saw women as symbols before they saw them as human. Yet even now, her eyes were clear. She was not looking at Bianca with hatred. She was studying her. That was Isabella. Even broken, she searched for truth before revenge. Carlo stepped forward, voice hard. My daughter did not kill him. Lorenzo's eyes did not leave Bianca. Then she will explain why a dying man looked at her before he died. Bianca's lips parted, but no sound came. Carlo's guards moved closer. Lorenzo's men responded instantly. The cathedral, barely saved from one explosion, became ready for another. Then Isabella spoke. Enough. Her voice was not loud, but somehow it cut through every weapon in the room. Lorenzo turned first. Bianca turned next. Even Carlo lowered his hand slightly. Isabella stepped forward, every movement slow from pain, but her spine straight. I spent 5 years listening to powerful men decide what my silence meant. I will not stand here and watch all of you turn another woman into a conclusion before she speaks. Lorenzo's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Bianca stared at Isabella as if she had expected accusation, not mercy. Isabella looked at her. Did you know I was alive? Bianca swallowed. The silence answered before her mouth did. Carlo's face darkened. Bianca! Tears gathered in Bianca's eyes. Not at first. Lorenzo's expression hardened. Bianca stepped away from her father's grip, shaking but forcing herself to stand alone. I knew there was a woman. I knew Lorenzo had loved someone before. Everyone knew that. They called her the ghost in his house. Salvatore told me Isabella was dead, but her memory still controlled him. Lorenzo's voice was low. And you believed him. I wanted to, Bianca whispered, because if she was dead, I only had to defeat a memory. Isabella's face tightened, but she did not interrupt. Bianca continued, each word dragging itself out of guilt. Months before the wedding, Salvatore came to me. He said Lorenzo would never truly unite with my family unless he buried Isabella publicly. He said the wedding needed a test, a shock, something that would force Lorenzo to choose the future over the past in front of every family. Carlo looked horrified. You dealt with him behind my back. Bianca laughed bitterly through tears. You raised me to become useful. Father, do not act surprised that I learned from the men around me. Carlo went silent. Lorenzo stepped closer. What did you think would happen? Bianca looked at him, ashamed. I thought Isabella's image would be shown. I thought she was dead and Salvatore had staged old footage. I thought you would be angry, but you would still choose the alliance because choosing a dead woman in front of the families would destroy you. Her voice broke. Then I saw her alive on the screen beside me. That was when I understood Salvatore had lied to all of us. Lorenzo's hand tightened. And the sniper? He asked. Bianca shook her head quickly. No, I swear, no, I did not order that. Carlo snapped. Then who did? Bianca turned slowly toward him, not with fear, with accusation. Carlo's face changed, very slightly, but Lorenzo saw it. So did Isabella. The shift was small, almost invisible to anyone who did not live by reading Dangerous Men. Carlo Valenti did not look shocked by suspicion. He looked annoyed that it had arrived too early. Bianca whispered, You knew. Carlo's voice turned cold. Careful. You knew Salvatore kept her alive. Careful, Bianca. You told me not to ask questions when Salvatore offered the wedding plan. You said every queen must learn which truths to ignore. Lorenzo turned fully toward Carlo. The cathedral seemed to darken around him. Carlo lifted his chin, abandoning the mask of a concerned father. "Do not look at me like that, De Santis. Your uncle created this war long before I entered it. But you used it." "I used an opportunity," Carlo said. "That is what men in our world do." Bianca stepped back from him as if seeing her father for the first time. Carlo's voice sharpened. Salvatore was unstable. He wanted to burn the families and crown himself over ashes. I wanted order. A marriage. A partnership. A future where Valenti and De Santis control the country without old men fighting over dead traditions. Isabella's eyes turned cold, and I was the obstacle. Carlo looked at her without shame. "You were a complication." The word moved through Lorenzo like fire. A complication. 5 years of chains. 5 years of stolen life. 5 years of grief and madness and blood. A complication. Lorenzo took one step forward. Carlo's guards raised their weapons. Isabella touched Lorenzo's arm before he moved again. Not to stop his anger, to steady it. Carlo noticed and smiled faintly. There it is, still controlled by her hand. Salvatore was right about one thing. Love makes you predictable. Lorenzo's face became very calm. "No," he said. "Love made Salvatore careless. He believed I would only rage. He believed I would choose like a wounded animal. He forgot Isabella taught me to listen before I destroy." Carlo's smile faded. Enzo entered from the side aisle, phone in hand. "Boss!" Lorenzo did not look away from Carlo. "Say it." "We found the sniper's route. South gallery, service stays, outer roof. He left behind Valenti ammunition." Carlo scoffed. "Easy to plant." Enzo continued. "And a burner phone. Last outgoing call was to a number registered under one of your port managers." Carlo's jaw tightened. Bianca looked at him with tears of disgust. "You ordered Salvatore killed." Carlo finally stopped pretending. He had become useless alive. The confession was soft, but everyone near the altar heard it. Carlo straightened, speaking now not only to Lorenzo, but to every family head still trapped in the cathedral. Salvatore would have exposed too much. His files touched all of us. Do not stand there pretending righteousness because you survived his bomb. Every empire in this room has bones beneath it. No one answered, because Carlo was right. That was the poison. He looked at Lorenzo. "I removed the one man who could drag us all into ruin. I saved more than your wedding. Boy, I saved the system." Lorenzo looked around the cathedral. The old bosses avoided his eyes. The judges trembled. The bankers calculated. The politicians prayed that no camera had caught their faces. Carlo saw their silence and smiled. "You see? They understand. They will choose stability. They always do." For a moment, it seemed true. Fear had a familiar rhythm. Men knew how to dance to it. They knew how to bury one dead traitor, blame chaos on Salvatore, and return to business by morning. But then Isabella stepped forward. She reached into the coat around her shoulders and pulled out the small recorder taken from the conservatory room. Lorenzo looked at her. She met his eyes. "I made copies," she said quietly. "Years of them." Carlo's expression changed. Isabella turned toward the remaining guests. Salvatore thought music was harmless. He forgot sound carries. He forgot walls remember. Every room where they kept me, every conversation outside the door, every name, every payment, every route, every woman moved through their system, every child uses leverage. I recorded what I could. Lorenzo stared at her, not because he was surprised she survived, because he was only now understanding how she survived. Not passively, not waiting, building a case in the dark. Isabella lifted the recorder higher. "You all thought I was a ghost. I was a witness." The cathedral went silent. Carlo moved first. He lunged toward her. Lorenzo caught him before he reached the second step. The impact drove Carlo back into a broken pew. God shouted. Weapons lifted. But this time, the old families did not rise with Carlo. They backed away. Not out of morality, out of self-preservation. The moment Isabella revealed evidence, Carlo stopped being a protector of the system and became the man standing closest to its exposure. Lorenzo held him by the collar, his voice low enough for only Carlo to hear. "You called her a complication. Carlo struggled, but Lorenzo's grip tightened. Now what should become the reason your name disappears? Carlo spat blood at his feet. Kill me and Valenti burns your city. Lorenzo released him with sudden calm. No, you still think this ends with killing. He turned to Enzo. Send everything. Enzo nodded. Within minutes, files began moving through encrypted channels. To family captains. To international investigators already paid by men who wanted rivals weakened. To journalists with enough protection to publish what others would bury. To judges who had not yet been bought. To the few enemies Lorenzo trusted more than allies because ambition made them predictable. Carlo watched his life begin to collapse through the glow of phones across the cathedral. One by one, men looked down at their screens. Names appeared. Accounts, routes, recordings, photographs, ledgers, dates. The truth did not arrive like justice. It arrived like infection, spreading too fast to cut out. Carlo's face lost color as his own captains received copies of transactions connecting Valenti shipping to Salvatore's prison network. Bianca covered her mouth, sobbing silently as she saw her family's crest beside payments for facilities where Isabella had been moved. Lorenzo turned to Bianca. You will testify. Carlo roared. She will do no such thing. Bianca looked at her father, and whatever daughter remained in her eyes died quietly. Yes, she said. Carlo stared at her. Bianca's voice shook, but she did not take it back. I wanted a crown. You taught me that power was the only thing that kept women safe. But you never told me the crown was made from other women's cages. Carlo's face twisted with fury. You ungrateful. Lorenzo's gun lifted before Carlo finished. Carlo stopped. Bianca walked away from him and stood beside Isabella. Not as a friend. Not as forgiven. As a witness choosing truth too late, but choosing it. Outside, dawn began to thin the night. The cathedral doors opened again, not for a bride, but for consequences. Men were taken out in silence. Some by Lorenzo's guards. Some by their own families. Some by authorities brave enough only because the evidence was already public. Carlo Valenti was removed alive, shouting threats that sounded smaller with every step away from power. Salvatore's body remained covered near the altar until the last of his loyalists were arrested. By sunrise, 3 old families had collapsed. By noon, 2 ministers resigned. By evening, the first international news channel used Isabella Romano's name, not as a dead lover, not as a Mafia boss's weakness, as a surviving witness whose hidden recordings exposed the largest criminal alliance in the country. Lorenzo watched the report from his estate without speaking. Isabella sat across the room near the window, wrapped in a gray blanket, a cup of untouched tea cooling beside her. Doctors had treated her body. No doctor could treat 5 stolen years in a single night. The estate was quieter than she remembered. No music still. Too much marble. Too many guards trying not to stare. The locked room where Lorenzo had kept her memory remained closed at the end of the hall. She had not asked to see it. He had not offered. For hours, they existed in the same room like 2 people standing on opposite sides of collapsed bridge. Finally, Lorenzo spoke. I can arrange another house. Somewhere no one knows. No guards inside unless you want them. Maria can stay with you. Doctors, lawyers, protection. Isabella looked at him. Stop. He stopped immediately. That alone told her he had changed. The old Lorenzo would have continued, building safety around her until it became another prison. She placed the cup down. I do not need you to arrange my life before I decide I want one. Pain crossed his face, but he accepted it. You're right. She looked out the window. I dreamed of this room. Lorenzo went still. In captivity, she continued, I used to imagine walking back into your house. I thought if I could just reach you, everything would become real again. The fear would stop. The doors would open. I would hear music. Her lips trembled. Now I am here, and I don't know who either of us is. Lorenzo did not move. I know. She turned to him then. Do you? Because part of me wants to hate you for not finding me. Another part remembers that you thought I was dead. Another part hates that I still feel safer when you enter a room. His throat tightened. Isabella's eyes filled. I don't want my heart to make decisions my wounds are not ready to survive. Lorenzo lowered his gaze. That sentence wounded him because he understood it. His grief had made decisions for 5 years, and the world had paid. He walked slowly to the table between them and placed a folder down. Isabella did not touch it. What is this? Everything in your name. Legal protection, medical authority, access to the evidence, properties bought with accounts tied to your captivity, transferred to a trust you control. The conservatory, too. She frowned. The conservatory? I bought it years ago, he said quietly. After you died. I never went inside. The words hung between them. After you died. A life built around a false grave. Lorenzo continued. It belongs to you now. Restore it. Sell it. Burn it. I have no claim. Isabella studied him. And you? What about me? What do you want? For a long time, Lorenzo said nothing. The honest answer was dangerous. He wanted 5 years erased. He wanted to hold her without feeling her stiffen. He wanted to hear her play again. He wanted to wake in a world where the wedding had never happened. Salvatore had never breathed, and Isabella had never learned the sound of chains. But wanting was not the same as deserving. So he said, I want to become someone who does not turn love into a battlefield. Isabella looked down. A tear fell onto her hand. Lorenzo stepped back instead of forward. She noticed. That single restraint moved something in her more than any dramatic apology could have. Weeks passed. The city did not heal. Cities built on blood do not heal quickly. They convulse first. The Valenti Empire fractured into 3 hostile pieces. Carlo's loyalists tried to reclaim ports, but Bianca's testimony destroyed their legitimacy. Some called her traitor. Others called her survivor. She accepted neither title. She entered protection, not to escape punishment, but to testify until every document with a family name was dragged into light. She never asked Isabella for forgiveness. One day, she sent a letter. Isabella read only the first line. I wanted to be chosen so badly that I helped men turn you into a test. She folded it and put it away. Not destroyed. Not answered. Some debts could not be settled on the schedule guilt preferred. Maria returned to Isabella's side, older, fragile, and carrying her own shame. They cried once, quietly, in the restored garden behind the estate. After that, they spoke of music more than apologies. Enzo remained loyal to Lorenzo, but even he changed. He no longer called every order strength. He questioned, carefully at first, then directly. Lorenzo allowed it because he had finally learned that men who never questioned him had helped bury Isabella alive. The locked room in Lorenzo's estate was opened on the 23rd day. Isabella entered alone. Inside were her old concert posters, photographs, the blue scarf she had left in his car, her final recording, the cracked remains of the violin case, and a single chair facing a music stand that had collected dust for 5 years. It was not a shrine. It was a wound preserved as furniture. Lorenzo waited outside the door. He did not enter until she called him. When he stepped inside, Isabella stood beside the broken violin case. You lived in here, she said. His voice was rough. Sometimes. You punish yourself with my memory. Yes. And punish the world because of it. He closed his eyes briefly. Yes. She turned toward him. I need this room emptied. It will be done. No, she said. Not by servants. By you. Lorenzo opened his eyes. She held his gaze. If you want to mourn me, mourn what happened, not the woman you imagined dead. I am alive. I am not that photograph. I am not that recording. I am not your lost softness waiting to return. Lorenzo nodded slowly. You are right. They emptied the room together. Not quickly, not romantically, painfully. Each object became a conversation. Some ended in silence. Some in anger, some in Isabella walking out to breathe. Lorenzo did not stop her. He did not follow unless she asked. By the end of the day, the room was bare. Isabella stood in the center, exhausted. What will you do with it? Lorenzo asked. She looked around. Windows, she said, and music. 3 months later, the room became a small studio, not for performances, for practice. The first time Isabella lifted a violin again, her hand shook so badly she nearly dropped the bow. Maria sat beside her. Lorenzo stood outside in the corridor, close enough to hear, far enough not to become the reason she played. The first note was terrible. Broken, thin, human. Isabella laughed and cried at the same time. Maria cried too. Lorenzo leaned his forehead against the wall and closed his eyes. 4 or 5 years, he had listened to recordings of her music because he believed that was all the world had left of her. Now, through an open door, he heard not perfection. Recovery. That sound changed him more than any confession. He began dismantling the old De Santis roots before the trials even started. Weapons channels were closed. Debt houses were exposed. The cargo lines connected to human trafficking were burned out at the root. Men who resisted were not granted glorious deaths. They were stripped of money, names, and protection, then delivered to the consequences they had always bought their way around. Some families called Lorenzo weak. Then their ledgers appeared on public channels. They stopped using the word. Lorenzo did not become clean. No man with his history could step into innocence because he wished to, but he became deliberate. He stopped confusing fear with order. He stopped calling revenge justice. He stopped letting dead men define what strength looked like. And Isabella watched, not as his reward, as her own witness. Sometimes she stayed at the estate. Sometimes she left for the conservatory, where restoration had begun. She hired teachers, opened scholarships for children of families harmed by the old roots, and turned the rehearsal rooms once used to hide evidence into classrooms filled with sound. The first public concert was held 1 year after the cathedral wedding. No chandeliers of criminal grandeur. No armed men disguised as ushers. No politicians entering through side doors. Just music students, families, survivors, and a city still learning how to breathe outside fear. Isabella did not perform at first. She sat in the front row, listening to a little girl play a simple piece with fierce concentration. Lorenzo stood at the back of the hall, not in the reserved seat someone had tried to give him. He preferred the back, not because he was hiding, because he understood the night was not his. After the concert, Isabella found him in the empty corridor. "You stood the whole time," she said. "I was fine. You were offered a seat. It was not my place." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "That is the first time you have said that without sounding bitter." He almost smiled. "I am improving slowly. Very slowly." "Yes." A silence passed between them, softer than before. She walked to the window overlooking the courtyard. The city lights shimmered beyond the gates. For years, that city had been a map of captivity to her. Now parts of it were becoming places again. Lorenzo stood beside her, leaving space. Isabella spoke without looking at him. "I don't know if I can love you the way I did." His chest tightened, but he answered steadily. "I know. That woman was taken from me." "Yes." "And the man I loved was changed by losing her." "Yes." She turned then. "So maybe the question is not whether we can return." Lorenzo held her gaze. "Maybe the question is whether the people we are now can choose each other without lying about what happened." For a moment, Lorenzo could not speak. The old him would have taken hope like possession. The new one treated it like a flame in wind. Careful, grateful, afraid to smother it. "I would like that chance," he said. Isabella nodded. Not forgiveness complete. Not a promise sealed. A beginning. Months later, when the trials began, Isabella testified for 7 hours. She named Salvatore, Carlo, the roots, the rooms, the doctors who looked away, the guards who laughed, the accountants who signed payments, the family captains who claimed loyalty while funding prisons. Lorenzo sat behind her every day, silent. He did not rescue her from the questions. He did not interrupt when lawyers tried to twist a memory. He did not turn her testimony into his redemption. He simply stayed where she could see him if she wanted to, and where she could ignore him if she needed to. When the verdicts came, the city shook again. Carlo Valenti received life behind walls he could not buy. Bianca received protection and a reduced sentence in exchange for testimony. She accepted it without public tears. Before leaving the courtroom, she turned once toward Isabella and lowered her head. Isabella did not smile, but she did not look away. That was enough. Salvatore's name was stripped from every De Santis property. His portraits were removed. His accounts were liquidated into survivor funds under Isabella's oversight. The cathedral where he had planned his massacre closed for restoration, and when it reopened, no Mafia weddings were ever permitted there again. People still spoke of that night. They called it the wedding that ended an era. They said Lorenzo De Santis went to marry power and found his past waiting at the altar. They said the bride vanished, the dead woman returned, and the old families learned that secrets buried alive eventually come back breathing. But the truth was quieter. The truth lived in a restored conservatory where children played wrong notes loudly and without fear. It lived in a former Mafia boss standing outside a practice room, waiting to be invited in. It lived in Isabella Romano choosing when to speak, when to leave, when to stay, when to forgive, and when not to. And one evening, almost 2 years after the cathedral, Isabella played on stage for the first time since her disappearance. The hall was full. Maria sat in the front row, holding a handkerchief. Enzo stood near the rear exit. Lorenzo stood at the back. As always, Isabella walked onto the stage wearing a simple black dress. No diamonds, no symbols, no one's property. Her violin rested beneath her chin. For a moment, she looked toward the back of the hall. At Lorenzo, he did not smile like a man claiming victory. He lowered his head slightly. Permission, respect, apology, and love all contained in one silent gesture. Then Isabella began to play. The first note filled the hall. Clear, steady, alive. Lorenzo closed his eyes. He did not hear the ghost he had mourned. He heard the woman who had survived him, Salvatore, Carlo, Bianca, the chains, the water, and the empire that tried to turn her into leverage. When the final note ended, the whole rose to its feet. Isabella did not look overwhelmed. She looked free. Afterward, in the quiet behind the stage, Lorenzo found her near an open window. Night air moved through the curtains. Her violin lay safely in its case. "You played beautifully," he said. She looked at him with a faint smile. "I know." He laughed softly, surprised. She stepped closer. There was still history between them. There always would be. Love did not erase 5 years. It did not clean blood from marble or make trauma poetic. It did not turn a Mafia boss into a saint because he regretted his sins. But love, when stripped of ownership, could become a choice made in daylight. Isabella reached for his hand. Lorenzo let her decide the distance. Her fingers closed around his. "Come home with me," she said. For 1 second, he could not move. Then he understood. Not his estate, not his empire, not the locked room where he had preserved a dead version of her. Home meant the place they would build next, if they built it honestly. Together. Lorenzo nodded once, his voice rough. "Wherever you choose." Years later, people would still ask whether Lorenzo De Santis had been redeemed by love. Isabella never answered yes. She knew redemption was not a kiss, a sacrifice, or a single night of choosing correctly. Redemption was repetition. It was a daily refusal to become what pain had trained you to be. So when people asked her what truly happened at that wedding, she would say only this. A man went to marry power, but his past arrived first. And for once, instead of burying the truth to keep his throne, he let the truth burn the throne down. That became the legend. Not the missing bride, not the Mafia war, not even the woman who returned from the dead. The legend was that Lorenzo De Santis had stood at the altar with 2 futures before him, one built on fear, one built on truth. And the moment he chose truth, he lost the empire he thought he needed, but found a life he had never believed he deserved.